I knew something was different the moment Mark Carney stepped up to the podium. Not the usual cautious tone, not the diplomatic balancing act we've come to expect from Canadian leaders. What he delivered instead was a direct challenge to the United States itself and to Donald Trump personally without even mentioning his name. It was the kind of moment that makes you stop, replay the clip, and ask yourself, did a Canadian Prime Minister really just say that? Carney didn't announce a policy. He detonated a political truth bomb that Washington has spent decades pretending wasn't possible. He said, with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the markets would be shaken by his words, that Canada's future is no longer tied to Washington's decisions. And in that single sentence, he did what no ally has dared to do in the entire Trump era. He made Trump's entire trade strategy irrelevant. Think about what that means. For years, Trump has banked on unpredictability, shock value, tariff threats, and the belief that every country around him needed America more than America needed them. That was the foundation of his leverage. The chaos wasn't a byproduct, it was the plan. But today, Carney shattered that plan. Not with bluster, not with insults, but with numbers, with $1 trillion playbook that blindsided everyone in Washington. The press room fell silent because they understood immediately. This wasn't a budget. This was a declaration of independence. And here's the part that stunned the world. Carney didn't come to negotiate with Trumpism. He came to bury it. Because in one stroke he took away the one thing Trump has always counted on when dealing with allies' dependency. Carney walked onto that stage with a message. No Canadian Prime Minister has ever said this plainly. We don't need you anymore. That was the moment, the rupture, the shock. But what exactly did Carney unveil? And how did he manage to flip decades of American leverage on its head in a single afternoon? That's where this story really begins. When Mark Carney called it a budget announcement, Washington expected spreadsheets, forecasts, and routine political messaging. What they got instead was a geopolitical earthquake that none of Trump's advisors had prepared for. Carney laid out a blueprint that didn't simply adjust Canada's economy, it rewired the logic of the entire U.S.-Canada relationship. He began with a sentence that carried the weight of a generation. Canada's future is no longer tied to Washington's decisions. Analysts in the room knew instantly that this wasn't symbolic, it was structural. He previewed the construction of an economic ecosystem capable of surviving and thriving whether Washington cooperates or not. He detailed the Build Canada Homes initiative, a national manufacturing and housing platform designed to slash construction time, cut costs, and expand capacity. On paper, it looked like a housing policy. In reality, it was the foundation of a self-contained economic engine that doesn't rely on American supply chains, capital markets, or material imports. Then came the Buy Canadian doctrine, an unprecedented shift that prioritizes Canadian suppliers across infrastructure, rail, steel, defense, and energy. Not suggested, not encouraged, default. It was the first clear indication that Carney was doing something far bolder than preparing for trade disputes. He was preparing for a world in which Trump's tariff threats have no power. This wasn't a press conference. It was a proclamation. A quiet but unmistakable declaration that Canada has stopped asking permission. And that's why Washington was stunned. Trump's leverage depends on dependency. Carney announced an economy where dependency no longer exists. But the bigger surprise wasn't what he revealed. It was what it quietly exposed about the last 8 years, and why Trump had unknowingly built the conditions for this moment. For years, Trump believed chaos was his advantage. Sudden tariffs, conflicting statements, trade threats, announced before breakfast. America First became less of a slogan and more of a warning. Rely on the U.S. economy at your own risk. But what Trump never realized is that unpredictability can create two outcomes. Either countries retreat into fear and compliance, or they learn to survive without you. Carney chose the second path, and he spent years preparing for it. Every tariff threat forced Canada to diversify. Every sudden policy shift pushed Canadian industries to reduce reliance on American inputs. Every unpredictable tweet reminded policymakers in Ottawa that the era of guaranteed partnership had ended. Trump thought he was tightening the leash. He was actually cutting it. Carney simply recognized what Trump never intended to create, an opening, a chance to redesign Canadian power from the ground up. He understood that dependency was the real vulnerability. Not tariffs, not policy differences. Dependency, the belief that Canada needed access to the American market more than America needed access to Canada's resources, manufacturing, and stability. Trump bet everything on that assumption, and Carney blew it apart. By the time he stepped to the microphone, the groundwork was finished. Canada had new trade networks, expanded export options, a growing strategic alliance with Europe and Asia, and a retooled domestic market built to replace American supply chains. The chaos that Trump viewed as domination was, in reality, the accelerator that pushed Canada to independence. And that independence allowed Carney to unveil the one thing Trump never expected: a Canada that negotiates from strength, not necessity. What Carney built wasn't a reaction to Trump's trade policy, it was the antidote to it. But the real shock came next. Carney didn't just end dependency. He announced an entirely new trade architecture that makes Trump's playbook obsolete. Carney's strategy isn't a patch. It's a complete reconstruction of how a medium-sized power can operate in a world where giants behave unpredictably. Instead of clinging to the old North American model, he unveiled a system that functions even if Washington closes its doors. At the center is a Canadian-first industrial chain, housing factories, rail networks, steel production, clean energy, AI-driven manufacturing, and domestic defense procurement. These aren't isolated programs. They are nodes in a new architecture designed to keep economic value circulating inside Canada, rather than bleeding outward to U.S. suppliers. The Build Canada Homes Plan creates demand for Canadian steel and manufacturing. The new rail and infrastructure programs absorb that capacity and feed revenue back into domestic industries. The expanded Defense Investment Agency redirects billions away from American contractors and into Canadian firms. And the Buy Canadian framework locks the system into place, ensuring that once the shift begins, it becomes irreversible. Carney essentially built an economy that cannot be threatened by tariffs because it no longer relies on American access to function. He built leverage, the kind of leverage Trump has used for years, but in reverse. He layered this with international diversification: Europe for materials and markets, Asia for strategic trade partners, and emerging partnerships across the Indo-Pacific. Canada is no longer a single-thread economy connected primarily to one superpower. It is becoming a multi-threaded economy that can pivot if needed. And the message to Washington was unmistakable: the rules you changed have now changed you. The old assumptions are gone. The North American hierarchy is shifting. Trump thought he was reshaping global trade. What he actually did was force Canada to build something stronger, more flexible, and immune to the intimidation tactics that once defined U.S. leverage. But this structural rebuild is only the beginning, because the next question is the one that has Washington genuinely worried. If Canada can do this, who follows next? Carney didn't just frame his policies in numbers and infrastructure. He framed them in history. He reminded Canadians and the world that their country wasn't built as a satellite of Washington. It was built by explorers, traders, and indigenous peoples who connected coasts long before America had even left St. Louis. That was more than a history lesson. It was a message. Canada has existed independently, thrived independently, and now has the capacity to do it again. By invoking that narrative, Carney reframed nationalism. Trump sells America first through fear, resentment, and threats. Carney sells Canada first through confidence, capability, and vision. One is built on grievance, the other on proof. One relies on manipulating others. The other relies on mastering yourself. This historical grounding gave Canadians legitimacy to act boldly. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't bravado. It was a reminder of what their country has accomplished before and what it can accomplish now. Carney made independence not just feasible, but inevitable by connecting policy to identity, history, and national pride. The implication for Washington is clear. Canada isn't reacting to U.S. policy. It is building from the lessons of its own past, and that history gives it leverage no tariff threat or tweak can undo. Then came the centerpiece of Carney's strategy, the Buy Canadian policy. This is more than a slogan or political posturing. It's a structural shift that changes the flow of billions of dollars in federal spending. Every department, every infrastructure project, every federal contract now defaults to Canadian suppliers, not as a preference, not as encouragement, as the rule. This move directly neutralizes Trump's trade leverage. Tariffs only work when one side is dependent on the other. When Canada stops buying U.S. materials and invests in its own industries, tariff threats become meaningless. Trump's supposed power evaporates because dependency no longer exists. Carney went further. He outlined programs spanning housing, rail, steel, energy, and defense. Each initiative reinforces the others, creating an interconnected economic ecosystem. It's not just protectionism, it's self-sufficiency designed to create long-term strategic advantage. For the first time in decades, Canada is dictating the terms of trade from strength rather than begging for access from need. The Buy Canadian policy is the ultimate equalizer. Trump's strategy relies on scarcity and leverage. Carney replaced scarcity with abundance, dependency with choice, and uncertainty with structure. The implications reach far beyond this administration. This is a blueprint that outlasts political cycles. Carney didn't just announce programs. He framed a choice for Canada, a moment of strategic clarity. There are two paths. The first is the old world. Depend on the U.S. Hunker down, cut the deficit, and hope investment trickles down. It's a path of fear, austerity, and missed opportunity. It requires slashing social programs, shrinking federal ambitions, and surrendering economic initiative. The second path is bold. Invest in the future, build capacity at home, diversify internationally, and reclaim sovereignty over the economy. Carney made this path clear. It is ambitious, confident, and unapologetically Canadian. Three words capture it: we choose Canada. This framing is brilliant. He took every argument Trump uses to justify America: first isolation, self-interest, economic nationalism, and turned it on its head. Canada first is not a defensive posture. It's a demonstration of capability. Where Trump's strategy depends on others' weakness, Carney's depends on Canada's strength. By offering a clear fork in the road, Carney turned a budget announcement into a philosophical statement. Canada can retreat into dependency or move boldly into independence. The choice is deliberate, irreversible, and framed as an act of national pride. And while Trump thinks leverage comes from fear, Carney is showing that true leverage comes from options. The more paths a nation can choose independently, the less another can control it. The defining moment came when a journalist asked about New Brunswick's forestry sector, 49 firms, $2 billion in exports, almost all destined for the United States. The Trump administration was attempting to block Canadian forestry products, and on paper, this could have been a crisis. But Carney didn't panic. He acknowledged the facts. Yes, 75% of exports go to the U.S. Yes, American pressure exists, and then reframe the narrative. Canada doesn't have to beg. Canada has options. Buy Canadian, build more at home, diversify. Internationally, expand production. 3 paths forward. 3 options that don't rely on Washington's goodwill. Then came the masterstroke. Carney made negotiation a tool, not a lifeline. The United States wants access to Canadian forestry products. Then the Americans need to provide something in return. Leverage no longer flows from the U.S. to Canada. It flows from Canada's capacity to choose. Trump's strategy has always depended on countries needing him. Carney flipped that paradigm. By combining domestic investment, diversification, and strategic planning, he ensured that Canada negotiates from strength. This was the moment that made economists sit up straight. This wasn't about protecting one sector. It was about teaching the world a new rule. Negotiation is no longer about compliance, it's about capability. Carney repeated a line that will be studied for years. They've changed the rules. He said it twice because he knew the world had to understand what was happening. The old frameworks, NAFTA-era predictability, shared prosperity agreements, careful diplomacy no longer apply. Trump's administration destroyed the old playbook through unpredictability. Carney didn't just respond, he reinvented the game. The radical shift is that Canada no longer plays by rules designed for dependency. They play by rules that reward self-sufficiency. This isn't a marginal adjustment. It's a redefinition of power dynamics. Washington once assumed that Canada had no alternatives. Carney just proved that assumption wrong. The stakes are high because the implications extend beyond Canada. If one medium-sized ally can create structural independence, others can follow. The radical shift is not only economic, it's psychological. Allies now realize dependency is a choice, not a necessity. Threats only work when countries rely on you. Carney removed that reliance. And in doing so, he neutralized Trump's primary tool of influence without firing a single shot. Carney's structural rebuild is backed by something tangible, a $1 trillion investment plan. Housing, infrastructure, clean energy, AI, manufacturing, every sector designed to make Canada unshakable. This isn't a short-term stimulus, it's a permanent transformation. Every dollar spent reinforces domestic capacity and reduces reliance on the U.S. market. It's an economy that grows from within, with a feedback loop that rewards Canadian labor, materials, and innovation. The genius lies in scale. Small tweaks can be reversed or undermined. Structural investment on this level locks in long-term advantage. Trump may issue more tariffs, tweet more threats, or try to intimidate other allies. None of it matters. Canada has built a table, so large that American scraps are irrelevant. This trillion-dollar plan is more than economics. It's leverage in action. Leverage that doesn't need the U.S. to function. Leverage that can dictate negotiations. Leverage that ensures Canada's autonomy endures across administrations, regardless of who sits in the White House. And then Carney delivered the line that crystallizes the entire strategy. These are things we don't have to ask permission for. We control them. We decide. It's our future. No shouting, no theatrics. Just certainty. This is the statement of a country that has taken its destiny into its own hands. Canada's power is no longer measured by proximity to the United States, by Washington's approval, or by American goodwill. Power is now measured by independence, capability, and choice. Trump has relied on threats, chaos, and dependency. Carney relied on foresight, investment, and strategy. The contrast couldn't be starker. Where one president tries to dominate through fear, the other neutralizes that dominance by building the alternative. This is the knockout. The world watches a quiet but irreversible lesson in leverage. You don't win by forcing others to need you. You win by ensuring you don't need them. And in doing so, Carney has redefined what it means to hold power in the 21st century. What Carney did isn't just about numbers or policies. It's a symbolic rupture. For decades, Canada defined its power in relation to the United States. Close ally, integrated economies, shared prosperity. These were the markers of influence. Trump built his strategy on that assumption: make countries dependent, then leverage that dependency. Carney dismantled it. With his policies, Canada no longer measures its success by proximity to Washington. Independence is the new metric. Self-sufficiency is the new standard. And in that transformation, Trump's relevance collapses. He is no longer the arbiter of Canadian economic decisions. His tweets, tariffs, and threats no longer carry weight. The symbolic message is clear. The era of American dominance in Canada's policy has ended. The most powerful country on earth has lost its primary tool of influence over a major ally. This isn't hyperbole. The press room understood it instantly. This isn't just a policy pivot, it's a paradigm shift. Trump's leverage, built over decades, has been rendered obsolete in a single afternoon. And the symbolism resonates far beyond borders. If Canada can do this, others will watch closely and ask themselves whether dependency is optional. The implications of Carney's announcements extend far beyond Ottawa and Washington. Allies across Europe and Asia are watching closely. The rules of engagement in global trade just changed. For decades, middle powers have operated under the assumption that U.S. policy dictates their options. No longer. Carney has proven that with strategic planning, domestic investment, and careful diversification, a medium-sized country can neutralize U.S. leverage. Other nations will take note. The tools of dependence can be dismantled. Economic alliances can be rewritten. National resilience can become a bargaining chip. This also sends a subtle message to the Trump administration. The era of unilateral coercion is being challenged. Countries no longer have to react in fear. They can act with foresight, strength, and autonomy. In effect, Carney's strategy recalibrates global trade dynamics and sets a precedent that will reverberate in capitals around the world. The world is seeing a blueprint for a post-American dependency model, and if Canada succeeds, it will redefine how allies approach negotiations with Washington, not from weakness but from power. The trillion-dollar investments, the structural rebuild, the Buy Canadian doctrine, all of these point to a longer horizon. This isn't about responding to Trump. This is about creating a Canada that thrives regardless of American policy or political chaos. We are entering what could be called a post-American trade era. In this era, dependency is optional. Alliances are partnerships, not chains. Trade negotiations are strategic choices, not desperate pleas. Canada is positioning itself as a model for economic resilience, showing that sovereignty and global influence can coexist with strong domestic foundations. The stakes are high. If Canada succeeds, it proves that nations don't need to bow to the largest economy to prosper. And it also reshapes expectations for Washington. Threats are no longer leverage, unpredictability is no longer power, and dependency is no longer guaranteed. Carney's vision extends far beyond a single budget or election cycle. It lays the groundwork for decades of Canadian independence, resilience, and global influence. And it raises the question every country will soon confront. How do you maintain relevance when your traditional tools of power are no longer effective? The real bombshell isn't that Canada announced a budget. It's that, in one press conference, Mark Carney redefined the rules of leverage, power, and independence in the 21st century. Trump's entire strategy, built on dependency, intimidation, and unpredictability, has been neutralized without confrontation, without escalation, without a single threat fired back. Canada now stands as a nation that doesn't need permission to act, doesn't need Washington's approval to thrive, and doesn't need dependence to secure influence. Every program Carney outlined, from Build Canada Homes to Buy Canadian, from defense investment to trillion-dollar infrastructure plans, isn't just policy. It's a statement of irreversible capability. Trump created the problem through chaos. Carney created the solution through strategy. The end result is structural, long-term, and symbolic. Washington can no longer assume control. Allies now have a blueprint for independence. And Canadians have a vision of power that is self-sustaining, resilient, and forward-looking. The bombshell is not a number or a policy line. It's the idea that dependency is a choice, and Carney just proved that the choice is Canada's. If you've followed this story, you've seen more than a budget. You've seen a blueprint for power in the modern world, a lesson in independence, and a demonstration of how strategy can outlast chaos. As Canada writes the playbook for the post-American trade era, every development matters. And we'll be here, tracking every move, analyzing every shift, and showing you what it means for the global balance of power. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to stay ahead of the story, because the world is changing and the nations that understand leverage, strategy, and independence will define the future. Don't just watch history unfold. Understand it.